A single drop of blood on a white handkerchief, and Hercule Poirot knew a dead woman had just accused the wrong person of murder. Welcome to the story. Grab your tea, take a seat, and let the little gray cells do the work. If that chill hit you already, smash subscribe. Your support keeps these dark tales coming. And drop in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. Chapter 1. The Impossible Confession. Rain beat against the high windows of St. Michael's Private Hospital, London, 1936. Hercule Poirot, still weak from recent illness, had come only to visit his old friend, Dr. Eric Marsden. He disliked the sharp smell of carbolic and the hushed suffering of corridors. Yet duty is duty. His small polished shoes clicked with perfect rhythm past the nurse's station, until a tired young woman led him to the doctor's office. Inside the room felt warm and crowded with books and bones. Marsden locked the door at once and spoke in a near whisper. Last night, a dying patient, Evelyn Harlow, told the night nurse she murdered her husband 5 years ago with slow poison. By dawn, she was dead. Poirot lifted one perfect eyebrow. And the police? Not called. The hospital fears scandal. The nurse fears she imagined it. Poirot placed his hat and gloves neatly on the desk. Tell me everything from the beginning, my friend. Marsden poured 2 small brandies, though it was barely noon. Evelyn Harlow, 47, rich, widowed 5 years. Her husband, Richard, died suddenly, officially heart failure, no suspicion. She inherited the houses, the money, everything. 2 years later, a rare nerve disease began. For the past 18 months, she has been completely paralyzed from the neck down. She could not lift a finger, could not speak above a whisper, could not even ring the bell without someone placing her hand on it. Yet at 3 in the morning, she spoke clearly to the nurse. I poisoned Richard with thallium, and I am glad he suffered the way I suffer now. Then she begged for a priest and fell unconscious, never to wake. Poirot turned the brandy glass slowly in his small hands. So a woman who cannot move her lips suddenly delivers a perfect confession? Either your nurse dreams, or someone has staged a most remarkable performance. There is more, said Marsden. This morning, under the dead woman's pillow, we found a white silk handkerchief embroidered with the letter H. In the center, one bright spot of fresh blood. She could not have placed it there. Her arms were flat at her sides when the nurse looked in at 6. No one saw it before. The little Belgian closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, bright and sharp. Already the scent of crime rises strong and strange. Give me 1 hour in that room, 1 hour with the staff and the visitor's book. Marsden almost smiled with relief. The room is locked, nothing touched. I knew you would come, Poirot. Poirot stood, smoothing his overcoat. 3 questions burn already. How does a paralyzed woman speak clearly of murder? How does fresh blood appear on silk beneath a corpse? And why does someone want us to believe Evelyn Harlow guilty when she could not possibly have done the thing she confessed? He picked up his walking stick. Come, doctor, let us enter room 12, where death borrowed a voice that was never its own. They walked the quiet corridor together, gaslights hissing softly, shadows stretching long and guilty. At the door marked 12, Poirot paused. In the last week, who entered this room? Only 3, said Marsden. The family solicitor once. Her sister, Lady Constance, twice, and the private night nurse, Miss Laura Kane, every evening. Poirot gave the smallest of smiles. Then one of those three carried more than kindness through this door. The game has begun. Next chapter, Poirot searches the silent room and finds the first thread that will unravel the killer. Stay close, the darkness is only starting.
Chapter 2. The Room That Spoke. Room 12 smelled of lilies left too long in water and the faint metallic trace of blood. Heavy green curtains kept out the grey afternoon, so the only light came from a single lamp beside the empty bed. The sheets were still turned back exactly as the night nurse had left them at 6 o'clock. Poirot stood in the doorway for a full minute, letting his eyes travel slowly over every detail like a painter studying a canvas before the first brush stroke. He moved first to the bed. The pillow still carried the shallow dent where Evelyn Harlow's head had rested for the last year of her life. Poirot bent close, his nose almost touching the linen. A faint sweetness lingered, not the flowers, but something chemical, delicate, almost like pears. He straightened at once. Thallium, my friend, the poison she claimed to have used. It leaves behind this very perfume when the body finally releases it. Marsden went pale. You mean she really did poison her husband and herself by accident years later? No, no, said Poirot gently. I mean someone wishes us to believe exactly that. Look. He lifted the pillow with 2 careful fingers. Beneath it lay the white silk handkerchief, folded into a perfect square. The embroidered H caught the lamplight, the single drop of blood in the center, still wet enough to gleam. Poirot did not touch it yet. Instead, he walked to the window and drew back the curtain an inch. Rain streaked the glass, but the frame was locked tight from the inside. No one entered this way. Next, he examined the bell push fixed to the headboard, a simple ivory button on a long flex so the patient could summon help. The flex ended in a wooden handle that had once rested in Evelyn's useless right hand. Poirot lifted the hand-shaped handle. It was wrapped now in fresh white tape. Yesterday it was pink. The day nurse told me this morning, said Marsden. Someone changed it in the night. Very clever, murmured Poirot. A new cover hides fingerprints, and perhaps something more. He knelt beside the bedside table. A glass of barley water stood half full. A silver spoon lay across the saucer. Poirot sniffed the glass, then touched the spoon with one gloved finger. Sticky. He held the spoon to the light. Tiny grains of a white powder clung to the bowl. Enough to carry a voice, but not enough to kill this time. Marsden stared. You are saying someone drugged her? I am saying someone gave her back the power of speech for exactly 10 minutes. A stimulant, perhaps, mixed with a muscle relaxant in perfect balance. She would feel clear, awake, able to move tongue and lips for the first and last time in 18 months, long enough to deliver a prepared confession, then sink into sleep forever. But who could calculate such a dose? Asked Marsden. Only a doctor or a nurse with years of experience, or someone who watched very closely night after night. Poirot crossed to the wardrobe and opened it. 3 nightgowns hung in a neat row, all lace and sadness. On the lower shelf sat a small leather traveling case. He clicked it open. Inside lay a bottle of French perfume, a prayer book, and a single object that made his mustache bristle with satisfaction. A tiny gramophone record, no larger than the palm of his hand. The label read only the words, Moonlight Sonata, First Movement. Poirot held it up between finger and thumb. And now we have the voice. He turned to Marsden. Your hospital has a gramophone in the common room, yes, of course. And thin copper wire can carry sound along the heating pipes if one knows where to drill a small hole. Marsden looked as though the floor had tilted beneath him. You were telling me the confession was recorded. I am telling you the confession was performed. Someone played this record through a hidden speaker at the exact moment the drug took hold. The night nurse heard her patient speak because Evelyn Harlow truly believed she was speaking. The words were planted in her mind hours earlier, perhaps under hypnosis, perhaps by simple repetition while she lay half awake. When the drug freed her tongue, the words came out as naturally as breath. A perfect ventriloquist act with a dying woman as the puppet. Poirot slipped the tiny gramophone record into his pocket. But the blood on the handkerchief, that is real. Real blood requires a real wound. He scanned the room again, then smiled like a cat who has seen the cream. There, above the picture rail, a thin wire ran along the wall, almost invisible, painted the same pale green. It disappeared behind the curtain. Poirot pulled a chair across, stood on it, and followed the wire to a tiny brass speaker, no bigger than a walnut, screwed neatly into the plaster. Beside it, a single drop of blood had dried dark against the green. Someone stood on this very chair last night, perhaps hurried, perhaps nervous. A small cut on the finger, enough to stain silk and leave a signature. The murderer signed his work and never noticed he left a piece of himself behind. Marsden wiped his forehead. Then everything, the confession, the blood, the handkerchief, was theatre. Theatrical and deadly, replied Poirot, stepping down. Because now the police will dig into Richard Harlow's death 5 years ago. They will find traces of thallium, and everyone will believe the poor paralyzed widow guilty after all. And the real murderer walks free, richer and safer than before. He looked around the quiet room one last time. But they made one mistake. They invited Hercule Poirot to the performance, and I never forget a face or a voice. He opened the door, and the cold corridor air rushed in. Come, doctor, we have a gramophone record to play, and 3 visitors to watch very carefully when they hear the dead woman speak again. The trap is set. Next chapter, the voice from the grave returns, and someone in the hospital is about to make a fatal mistake.
Chapter 3. The Voice Returns. Poirot asked for absolute silence in the doctor's private office. He placed the tiny gramophone record on Marsden's larger machine, borrowed from the nurse's sitting room, and adjusted the needle with the care of a jeweler setting a diamond. Marsden locked the door, turned the key twice, and stood back. The little Belgian raised one finger for quiet, then lowered the arm. A faint crackle. Then a woman's voice, weak but perfectly clear, filled the room. I killed Richard. I watched him lose his hair, his nails, his strength, day by day. Thallium is slow and cruel, and I am glad he suffered as I suffer now. Forgive me, God, but not him, never him. The voice broke into a dry sob, then silence. Marsden's face had gone the color of ash. That is Evelyn, exactly. Her accent, her little pause before the word forgive. Poirot lifted the needle and smiled without warmth. Exactly, yet not Evelyn. Listen again. He played the record a second time, but now he held a stopwatch. 22 seconds from first word to last. He turned to Marsden. Tell me, doctor, When the night nurse heard this confession, how long did it last? She said perhaps 2 minutes. The woman spoke slowly, cried, begged for a priest. 2 minutes, said Poirot softly. Yet here we have only 22 seconds. The rest was skillful repetition, looping the same fragment while the drug kept the patient awake and believing she was pouring out her soul. Marsden sank into a chair. Then the nurse heard Evelyn repeat those same sentences over and over. She heard what she was meant to hear, a perfect illusion. Poirot wrapped the record in silk and placed it in his breast pocket. Now we know how the trick was done. A hidden speaker, a looped recording, a temporary drug to loosen the tongue and the mind. The blood on the handkerchief was the final flourish, the signature of a proud artist. But every artist wishes to see his work admired. Tonight, we shall give our murderer that chance. He outlined the plan in 6 crisp sentences. At 9 o'clock, when the private nurse, Miss Laura Kane, arrives for her evening shift, the night nurse will greet her with trembling excitement. She will say the dead woman's voice came again from room 12 just after dusk, soft, pleading, exactly as before. Miss Kane will be told the door has been locked again, but the key is on the hook. Curiosity, fear, pride, one of them will pull her back to that room. Marsden will watch from the corridor with 2 trusted orderlies. Poirot himself will wait inside the wardrobe. Marsden tried to protest. If she brings a weapon, she will not need one, replied Poirot. The trap is made of her own vanity. A murderer who stages such theater cannot resist an encore. He looked at his pocket watch. 9 o'clock is in 40 minutes. Have your most innocent-looking nurse practice her frightened whisper, and we are ready. Marsden nodded slowly, already moving toward the door. One more thing, Doctor. When the curtain rises tonight, let no one speak my name. To our killer, Hercule Poirot is still far away in his flat, drinking tisane and reading the evening paper. That is the final piece of bait. The office lamp flickered once and steadied. Outside the rain had stopped, and a thin London moon hung over the wet roofs like a watchful eye. Somewhere in the hospital, a clock struck the quarter. Poirot smoothed his mustache, adjusted his tie, and allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The little gray cells were singing now, and very soon someone was going to dance to their tune. The stage is dressed. The actors are in place. Next chapter, the door of room 12 opens again, and the killer steps into the trap.
Chapter 4. The Trap at 9. The corridor of the private wing had never felt so long. Gas jets burned low, turning the green walls the color of deep water. At the far end, room 12 waited behind its locked door like a black box on a stage. Hercule Poirot stood inside the wardrobe, among the faint scent of lavender sachets and camphor. He had left the door open exactly 1 inch, enough to see the bed and the window, but not enough for moonlight to betray him. His small feet rested on a folded blanket, so no creak of wood would announce him. He breathed slowly through his nose, counting heartbeats the way other men count sheep. At 5 minutes to 9, the night nurse, Sister Ruth, appeared. She had been chosen because her face still carried the soft roundness of innocence. She walked past room 12 twice, humming nervously under her breath, then stopped as if startled by her own shadow. She pressed her ear to the door for a long moment, then gave a little cry that carried perfectly along the corridor. Oh heavens, it is happening again!
She hurried away, her rubber soles almost silent, yet every step planned. From his hiding place, Poirot heard the quick patter of approaching feet. A woman's shoes this time, higher heels clicking with purpose. The key turned in the lock. The door opened, letting in a blade of yellow light from the corridor. Miss Laura Kane stepped inside and closed the door behind her with great care. She was younger than Poirot expected, perhaps 28, tall with the kind of calm beauty that makes people trust nurses instantly. Her uniform was starched snow white, her auburn hair pinned beneath the cap in perfect wings. She stood quite still in the center of the rug, breathing through her mouth as though tasting the air. Then she spoke very softly to the empty room. "So you came back, Evelyn. I knew you would. I always knew you were stronger than they said." She moved to the bed and touched the turned-back sheet, almost tenderly. "I gave you peace, darling. You suffered so long. You begged me every night to let you go. And now you spoil it all by talking." Her voice stayed gentle, but the words cut like scalpels. Poirot watched every movement. He reached into the deep pocket of her apron and drew out a small black box, no larger than a cigarette case. From it, she took a fresh gramophone needle, glinting silver in the moonlight. She walked straight to the spot above the picture rail where the hidden speaker waited. Standing on tiptoe, she unscrewed the tiny grill. Her fingers were quick, steady, the fingers of someone who had done this many times before. She replaced the old needle with the new one, humming under her breath the same phrase over and over. Moonlight Sonata. She knew the record by heart. A thin line of blood appeared on her left thumb where the sharp needle pricked her. She did not notice. She pressed her thumb absently against the wall, leaving a tiny crimson print beside the speaker. Then she took from the same pocket a folded white handkerchief, silk with an embroidered H. She opened it flat, caught the fresh drop of blood in the center, and smiled as though greeting an old friend. "There you are, my little signature. They will find you tomorrow and think poor Evelyn bled in her sleep. They will never look higher." She knelt and slid the handkerchief beneath the pillow exactly where the first had been discovered. The movement was smooth, rehearsed, perfect. She stood back to admire her work, then spoke again to the empty bed. "This time you stay quiet, Evelyn. No more confessions. Richard Harlow deserved what he got, and so did you. You should have died grateful." Poirot stepped from the wardrobe without a sound. "Bonsoir, Mademoiselle Kane." The effect was electric. She spun around, her hand flying to her throat as though an invisible hand had seized her. For one heartbeat, her face was pure terror. Then the mask slipped back into place, calm, professional. "Monsieur Poirot, Dr. Marsden said you might visit tomorrow. I did not expect you tonight." Poirot inclined his head. "I find the night reveals more truth than the day. You have just revealed a great deal." He walked slowly around her, never taking his eyes from her face. "You poisoned Richard Harlow 5 years ago. You watched his hair fall, his skin loosen, his mind crumble. Then when your mistress began to waste away in the same manner, you decided to finish what fate had started. But you needed her death to look natural and her silence absolute. So you gave her small doses of the same thallium to speed the paralysis. Every evening you sat beside her bed and whispered that she was guilty, that she had poisoned her husband, that God would punish her. Night after night, until the idea became her own. When she was too weak to deny anything, you staged the perfect confession. A drug to wake her voice, a recording to supply the words, and your own blood to sign the lie. All so that when the police finally looked again at Richard Harlow's death, they would blame a dead woman who could never answer. Laura Kane backed against the bed, her hands gripping the iron rail. You cannot prove any of this. Poirot held up the tiny gramophone record between finger and thumb. This proves the voice was not hers. The fresh needle you just fitted proves you returned tonight to destroy evidence. The blood on the wall and on the new handkerchief will match the cut on your thumb. And Dr. Marsden, with 2 orderlies, is listening at the door. He heard every word you spoke to your dead patient. For the first time, her composure cracked. She looked wildly around the room like an animal smelling the trap too late. Then suddenly she lunged, not at Poirot, but at the window. She threw it open and climbed onto the sill in one swift movement. 3 floors below, wet cobblestones gleamed in the moonlight. Poirot did not move. You will not jump, mademoiselle. You are far too proud to die looking clumsy. She hesitated, 1 foot already outside. Behind her, the door burst open, and Marsden rushed in with the orderlies. She looked once at Poirot, her green eyes blazing with something close to admiration. You are clever, little man. But cleverness does not bring back the dead. Then she stepped backward into the night. There was no scream, only the soft thud of a body meeting stone. Poirot walked to the window and looked down. Laura Kane lay on her back, her white cap still impossibly perfect, her eyes open to the moon. He closed the window gently. The performance is over, and the curtain falls forever. The case is closed, but one final twist remains. Next chapter, the secret Richard Harlow took to his grave, and the reason a nurse became the most dangerous woman in London.
Chapter 5. The Poison in the Will. Dawn crept pale and reluctant over the hospital roofs. Laura Kane's body had been carried away hours earlier, yet the smell of tragedy still hung in room 12 like cheap perfume. Hercule Poirot sat in Dr. Marsden's office, wrapped in a borrowed dressing gown, his small feet in carpet slippers. A pot of thick chocolate steamed beside him, but he had not touched it. He stared instead at a single sheet of paper Marsden had just placed on the desk. Richard Harlow's last will, dated 1 week before his death, 5 years ago. "Read it aloud, my friend," said Poirot quietly. Marsden cleared his throat. "To my wife, Evelyn, I leave the house in London, the estate in Devon, and the income from my investments for her lifetime. On her death, everything passes to my faithful nurse and companion, Miss Laura Kane, in grateful recognition of her devotion during my long illness. There were smaller bequests to servants, but the bulk, the millions in today's money, went to Laura Kane the moment Evelyn died." Marsden put the paper down. The will was never probated because Evelyn lived 5 more years. Laura waited. She waited, and she helped the waiting along. Poirot nodded slowly. "So now we see the whole design. Richard Harlow was already dying when he wrote that will. Thallium works slowly. He knew he had been poisoned, yet he believed the poison came from his wife's jealousy. He loved his nurse. She had cared for him night and day. She listened to his fears. In gratitude, and to punish Evelyn, he left everything to Laura. When Evelyn began to show the same symptoms 2 years later,
Laura understood the cruel joke fate had played. If Evelyn died naturally, the money would come to her at last. But Evelyn lingered. Month after month, year after year. Laura grew older. The fortune stayed locked away. Patience turned to fury. She decided to finish Evelyn with the same poison and to make Evelyn carry the blame for both deaths. Marsden rubbed his tired eyes. She sat by that bed every evening, whispering guilt into a dying woman's mind. She turned love into torture. Poirot turned the will over in his neat hands. And when the time was perfect, she gave Evelyn one clear hour of speech, one looped recording, one drop of her own blood. A masterpiece of cruelty. She almost succeeded. She would have succeeded if she had not needed to return tonight to plant fresh evidence. Pride, the eternal undoing of the criminal. A knock came at the door. The young night nurse, Sister Ruth, entered pale and trembling. She carried a small tin box. "I found this hidden in Miss Kane's locker." Inside lay 3 glass vials, half full of colorless liquid, and the folded letter. Poirot opened the letter. It was written in Laura Kane's neat hand and dated yesterday. "If anything happens to me, know that Evelyn Harlow poisoned her husband and then herself out of remorse. I tried to save them both, but evil is stronger than care. Burn this with me." Poirot gave a soft laugh without humor. Even in preparing her suicide, she tried to close the circle. She wanted the last word even from the grave. He handed the letter and the vials to Marsden. "These go to Scotland Yard." Marsden looked suddenly older. "Will you stay for the inquest?" "No, my friend. Hercule Poirot does not enjoy coroner's courts. He enjoys only the moment when order is restored to the universe. That moment came when Laura Kane chose the window instead of the handcuffs. Justice has been served, though not by the law." He stood up, smoothing the dressing gown. "One last small service. Send flowers to Sister Ruth. She played her part bravely and will have nightmares for years. White lilies. They remind us that even in hospitals, death can be beautiful." He walked to the window. London was waking under a washed, clean sky. Somewhere below, a black van carried away the woman who loved money more than life. Poirot raised his cup of cold chocolate in a small, silent toast. To the little gray cells, and to the truth that always finds a window, even when every door is locked.
Chapter 6. The Second Grave. A cold November fog clung to London like a guilty secret when the black-edged envelope arrived at Whitehaven Mansions. Poirot had only just returned from a peaceful fortnight by the sea and believed the affair of Evelyn Harlow buried forever, alongside Laura Kane. Yet there on his breakfast tray lay one letter that smelled faintly of funeral lilies. The outer sheet was signed C.G., Lady Constance Greer. Inside was a smaller sealed note in the unmistakable hand of the dead nurse. Poirot read Laura Kane's final confession twice without moving a muscle. In it, she laid bare the truth she had carried to her own death. Richard Harlow had indeed been poisoned with thallium, but the poison was purchased and supplied by Lady Constance herself. For 3 months, the elegant sister had passed tiny vials to the nurse in the hospital garden, promising half the fortune once Evelyn followed her husband to the grave. When Richard changed his will and left everything to Laura instead, Constance's plan turned from murder to slow torture. She wanted her sister not only dead, but damned, branded forever as a poisoner, so that no suspicion could ever climb the family tree to its highest branch. Poirot did not hesitate. Coat, hat, stick. Within the hour, his taxi drew up before the tall Mayfair house, where black lace curtains had hung at the windows for 5 unnecessary years. Lady Constance received him in the morning room, seated beside a fire that gave no warmth. She wore mourning as though it were armor. "You came," she said simply. "I always come when justice has been left waiting in the corridor," Poirot replied, and placed Laura Kane's letter between them like a playing card turned face up. Lady Constance did not touch it. She did not need to. She already knew every word. "You arranged the death of Richard Harlow," Poirot continued quietly. "You attempted the death of your own sister. You created a monster in nurse's clothing and then tried to silence her with the same poison you both used, all because you believed money and pride were worth more than blood." Lady Constance lifted her chin. "Prove it." Poirot allowed himself the very smallest of a smile. "The vials recovered from Laura Kane's locker carry your fingerprints on 2 of them. The night gardener remembers a veiled lady in black who met the nurse among the laurel bushes every Tuesday for 3 months. He thought you were bringing medicine. He will remember differently now that Scotland Yard asks the question properly. The letter is only the ribbon on the gift, madame. The gift itself is waiting in your hall." For the first time, the mask slipped. The proud face crumpled like wet paper. "Evelyn took everything," she whispered. "Our parents' love, the suitors who should have been mine, the life I was born to lead. When Richard began to fail, I merely helped fate along. I only wanted what was owed." "The debt is about to be paid," Poirot said, and turned toward the door. Behind him, 2 inspectors stepped into the room, warrants crisp in their hands. Lady Constance did not scream. She simply stared into the fire as though watching her entire world burn to ash. Outside, the fog had lifted, and weak winter sunlight glittered on the wet pavement. Poirot climbed back into the taxi and gave his address. As the cab pulled away, he permitted himself one quiet sigh. Some crimes need 2 graves before they sleep. This one finally had its second.
Chapter 7. The Quiet After the Storm. 3 weeks later, Hercule Poirot sat alone in his immaculate drawing room at Whitehaven Mansions, the fire crackling gently and the scent of hot design drifting from a Sèvres cup. Outside, December had wrapped London in soft white silence. The first real snow of the winter muffled even the taxi horns on the embankment. The newspapers had long since moved on from the Harlow scandal. Lady Constance Greer had been quietly committed to Holloway awaiting trial, her name mentioned only in the driest legal columns. Laura Kane's brief inquest had been reopened, closed again, and the public had already forgotten both women. Yet Poirot had not forgotten. On the small table beside him lay a single object that had arrived that morning, a plain white card edged in black. No envelope, no stamp, delivered by hand. In the center, written in the same elegant copperplate he had last seen on a suicide note, were 4 words. "You were right. C." Nothing more. No plea, no apology, no dramatic flourish. Just the quiet acknowledgement of a proud woman who now had nothing left but the truth. Poirot turned the card over in his neat fingers for a long time. He thought of Evelyn Harlow, trapped in her useless body, yet still able to feel guilt that was never hers. He thought of Richard Harlow dying slowly while believing his wife hated him. He thought of Laura Kane stepping backward into the night rather than face the little Belgian across a courtroom. And he thought of Lady Constance, who had started everything with a whisper in a darkened garden and ended it staring at prison walls. He placed the card carefully into a small leather folder marked simply "Affaire Harlow" and closed the drawer. George entered to remove the tray. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Poirot looked up, and for once the green eyes were gentle.
Yes, George. Open that bottle of the 1904 Armagnac you have been hiding since my birthday. 1 glass only. Tonight we drink to the dead who can finally rest, and to the living who must carry the weight a little longer." George bowed and withdrew. When he returned with the crystal balloon glowing amber in the firelight, Poirot raised it toward the quiet room. "To order restored, even when it arrives too late for some," he murmured. He drank slowly, savored the urn of the old brandy, and then set the glass down empty. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in a clean white sheet that hid every stain. Inside, the fire settled into embers, the clock ticked toward midnight, and Hercule Poirot allowed himself the rare luxury of perfect silence. The case was closed. The little gray cells could rest. Until the next impossible crime knocked softly at the door.
Chapter 8. The Echo That Refused to Die. Spring had barely begun to touch London when the letter arrived, postmarked from Switzerland and addressed in a careful, almost childlike hand. Poirot recognized neither the writing nor the name at the bottom, but the single line inside made the little Belgian sit very still. "Evelyn Harlow is alive." For a long moment, the only sound in the flat was the soft ticking of the ormolu clock. Poirot read the letter again, slower this time. The writer claimed to be a senior nurse at a private sanatorium above Lake Geneva. 6 weeks earlier, a new patient had been admitted under the name of Madame Duval, completely paralyzed, unable to speak, eyes open but unresponsive. Yesterday, during routine physiotherapy, the woman had suddenly gripped the nurse's wrist with surprising strength and whispered one word in English: "Poirot." The sanatorium had traced the name through newspaper archives, found the Harlow case, and written it at once. They enclosed a photograph, a thin woman with silver-streaked hair lying against white pillows, eyes wide and terrified, unmistakably Evelyn Harlow. Poirot laid the photograph on his desk as though it might burn his fingers. Evelyn Harlow had been pronounced dead at St. Michael's Hospital. He himself had seen the death certificate signed by Marsden, the body removed by the undertaker, the coffin sealed. Yet the eyes staring up at him from the Swiss pillow were alive and pleading. He rang for George. "Pack for 3 days. We leave for Geneva on the afternoon boat train. And telephone Dr. Marsden at the hospital. Tell him Hercule Poirot requires his presence in Switzerland at once. Tell him the dead have begun to send postcards." 24 hours later, the two men stood in a quiet room that smelled of pine and beeswax high above the lake. The woman in the bed watched them with desperate intensity. When Poirot approached, she managed to move her head a fraction, tears sliding silently into her hair. Marsden's voice shook. "It is Evelyn! God help me, it is Evelyn!" The Swiss doctor explained. The patient had arrived in a private ambulance from northern Italy, accompanied only by a lawyer's letter and enough money to guarantee absolute discretion. She had been in a deep coma for months, kept alive by feeding tubes and meticulous care. Only in the last week had she begun to surface, and the first word on her lips was the name of the detective who was supposed to have solved her murder. Poirot bent close to the woman's ear and spoke in the gentlest French. "Madame, you are safe. The guilty have paid. Blink once if you understand." The eyelids fell and rose again, slowly, deliberately. He straightened and turned to Marsden, his voice suddenly hard as winter iron. "My friend, you signed a death certificate for a woman who was not dead. You allowed a living soul to be stolen from her bed and sold to silence. Tell me how this happened, or I swear the next coffin will be yours." Marsden aged 10 years in 10 seconds. "It was Constance.
3 days before Laura Kane's death, Constance came to me in terror. She said Laura was about to confess everything, that the nurse planned to take her down too. Constance begged me to help. She had found a clinic in Italy that would take a hopeless case for a great deal of money, no questions. When Laura died, and the room was empty for those few hours before dawn, we substituted a body from the mortuary slab, a woman who had died of cancer the same night, similar age, similar build. We dressed her in Evelyn's nightgown, placed the handkerchief, everything. Constance's lawyer arranged the ambulance. I thought we were saving Evelyn from the scandal of trial and imprisonment. I thought we were granting her peace. Poirot's eyes blazed. You granted her a living death. You buried an innocent cancer patient under Evelyn Harlow's name, and you sold a helpless woman into exile so that Lady Constance could buy 1 more year of freedom. You turned medicine into commerce and mercy into a crime. He turned back to the bed, where Evelyn's tears still fell. Madame, your nightmare ends today. You will come home. Within a week, the quiet machinery of justice began to turn again. Lady Constance, already broken, signed a full confession from her cell and hanged herself before the new trial could begin. Dr. Marsden was struck off the medical register and vanished, some say to Canada, others to the bottom of the Thames. The Swiss clinic returned every franc with trembling apologies. Evelyn Harlow was carried gently down the mountain on a perfect May morning, wrapped in blankets and sunlight. She never spoke again. The damage to her nerves was too great, but when the train crossed the Channel and England appeared through the window, she closed her eyes, and the tears that slid down her cheeks this time were different. Poirot stood in the corridor outside her compartment, watching the green fields of Kent slide past. George asked quietly, "Will she ever know peace, sir?" Poirot considered the question for a long time. "She knows she was innocent. She knows the guilty have paid. That is the only peace the dead or the living are ever promised." He adjusted his hat and returned to his seat. Some echoes refuse to die, but sometimes they return, only to be laid properly to rest at last.
Chapter 9. The Last Confession. The train from Dover reached London in soft June twilight, and Evelyn Harlow came home not to the great house in Belgravia, which had long been sold, but to a quiet nursing convent on the edge of Hampstead Heath. The sisters there asked no questions. They simply made up a corner room with white curtains and a view of ancient oaks. Poirot visited every Tuesday, always bringing the same small posy of violets and a bar of the Swiss chocolate she could now taste again. She never spoke, but her eyes followed him with something close to peace. On the 3rd Tuesday in July, she managed something new. When he placed the violets in the glass beside her bed, she lifted her right hand, slowly, trembling, but of her own will, and rested it on his sleeve. The fingers pressed once, twice, 3 deliberate times. A signal. She wanted to write. Sister Agnes brought a child's slate and a soft chalk. Poirot held it steady while Evelyn's hand crawled across the surface like a wounded bird, finding strength. It took nearly 20 minutes to form 7 words. "Tell them I forgave everyone long ago." Poirot read them aloud, his voice steady only because the little gray cells demanded it. Then he bent and kissed her forehead with the gentleness of an old friend. "Madame, they will know. I'll give you my word." That night he wrote 3 letters. The first went to the Home Office, requesting that the file on Lady Constance Greer be sealed forever. Some truths, he wrote, serve only to wound the innocent twice. The second letter went to the Swiss clinic, enclosing a donation large enough to guarantee that no patient would ever again be hidden for money.
In the third letter he carried himself to the editor of the Times. It was very short. Evelyn Margaret Harlow, widow of Richard Harlow, Esquire, died peacefully at St. Cecilia's Convent on the 18th of July, surrounded by kindness and the certainty of her innocence. No flowers by request. Donations to the Neurological Research Fund. The obituary appeared the next morning, small and dignified on page 7. Most readers passed over it without pause, but a few, those who remembered the old scandal, felt something settle in their hearts, like the last piece of a puzzle sliding home. Poirot attended the funeral alone. A dozen nuns in gray habits, the scent of beeswax and incense, and a plain wooden coffin carried by 4 silent gardeners. When the priest spoke the final absolution, Poirot placed the last bunch of violets on the lid and whispered so softly that only the wind heard. "Sleep now, madame. The play is finished. The audience has gone home, and no one will ever hurt you again." He walked away down the gravel path without looking back. The sun was setting behind the oaks in long slants of gold, and for once the little Belgian walked without his stick, lighter than he had felt in years. Some cases do not end with handcuffs or headlines. Some end only when an innocent heart is finally laid to rest with its name washed clean.
Chapter 10. The Truth in the Violets. On a golden September afternoon, exactly 1 year after Evelyn Harlow's quiet funeral, Hercule Poirot returned to the convent on Hampstead Heath for the last time. The Mother Superior met him at the gate with a small wooden box and a single sheet of convent notepaper sealed with violet wax. Sister Agnes found this hidden beneath the mattress after Madame Harlow's death, she said softly. She waited until now because Madame made her promise to wait 1 full year. The letter inside is addressed to you. Poirot took the box to the same corner room where Evelyn had spent her final months. The bed was gone, the window open to the scent of late roses. He sat in the small chair, broke the violet seal, and began to read the words Evelyn Harlow had written with infinite labor during the nights when pain allowed her a few minutes of strength. "Monsieur Poirot, if you are reading this, I am truly gone, and the world believes me innocent. That is your gift to me, and I thank you with whatever is left of my soul. But innocence is not the same as truth, and I will not meet God carrying a lie, even a kind one. I killed Richard. I killed him slowly, carefully, lovingly, the way one kills a monster who wears the face of a husband. He beat me for 12 years. He broke my ribs, my wrist, my spirit. When the doctors said I had the wasting disease, he smiled and told me it was God's justice. That night I stole the thallium from the hospital laboratory where Constance's husband once worked. I fed it to Richard in his nightly brandy, and I watched him die the way he had watched me suffer. I never told a soul, not even when my own body began to fail from the tiny traces that splashed on my fingers each time I poured. Laura Kane discovered the truth by accident. She found my notebook hidden in the mattress. She threatened to expose me unless I changed Richard's will to leave everything to her. I was too weak to refuse. Constance discovered Laura's plan and decided to silence us both. She paid Laura to finish me with the same poison, then staged the confession so the world would blame only me. When you arrived, everything unraveled. I lived long enough to see them pay. I lived long enough to be forgiven by the only person whose forgiveness mattered, myself. Burn this letter. Let the world keep the gentle story you gave it, but, between us, let the truth finally rest. Evelyn. Poirot read the confession twice. Then he opened the wooden box. Inside lay the small leather-bound notebook Evelyn had mentioned, its pages filled with daily doses, dates, and one line repeated like a prayer. "Tonight he will suffer a little more, and I will be a little freer." He closed the book, placed the letter inside it, and walked out into the convent garden where the last roses still clung to the wall. There, he built a tiny fire in the old iron brazier the gardeners used for autumn leaves. He fed the notebook and the letter to the flames page by page, watching the words curl and blacken and vanish into harmless ash. When only violet-scented smoke remained, he scattered the ashes beneath the rosebush that grew outside what had been Evelyn's window. Some truths are too heavy for the living and too cruel for the dead. This one belonged now to the earth and to God alone. Poirot brushed the ash from his gloves, straightened his hat, and walked away down the sunlit path. Behind him, the roses nodded once, as though keeping a secret they would never tell. The case of the blood-stained handkerchief, the impossible confession, and the woman who was buried twice is closed forever. Every player is silent, every debt is paid, every ghost at last is free. Thank you for walking this long, dark, beautiful road with me from the first drop of blood to the last violet flame. If the story broke your heart and mended it again, share it, like it, subscribe, and carry its whisper with you. Sometimes the perfect crime is the one only two people ever truly know, one who commits it and one who chooses to forget. Until the next impossible truth demands to be told. Au revoir, my friends. The little gray cells rest tonight. May yours do the same.